Well, good afternoon, everyone, and let me call you together at this time. Aloha mai kako, aloha. On behalf of the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, I want to welcome you to our presentation here at the Maui Arts and Culture Center, How to Help Lahaina Rebuild and Reduce Maui's Housing Shortage, something that's on all our hearts. We'll all remember August 8th, 2023, about a year ago. And that day has left its imprint on all our hearts and minds. It's changed life forever in Lahaina, on Maui, and throughout the state of Hawaii. I think that as we reflect upon this past year, the people who come to mind the most are those who lost their lives and their homes, families that were affected and altered. In addition to that, we've seen so many heroes, first responders, ordinary citizens, government officials, and much outpouring of the community has taken place in terms of helping to meet the immediate needs of those who have suffered. And I'm so proud of many of you who are here today and your efforts and what you've done, and I want to thank you. On behalf of Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, I want to say we've been very proud to be part of the effort. Our particular contribution has been in the space of public policy, taking a look at those kinds of issues that, from a legal point of view or a government regulatory point of view, can sometimes interfere with what we all want to do, which is to see the rebuilding and restoration of Lahaina, to see ultimately the thriving of the people here on Maui and throughout our state. Today, I think you're going to enjoy yourself and learn as we share a little bit with you about our policy work. This year, we've been very busy. In January, Grassroot Institute sent a memo to Governor Josh Green and Mayor Richard Bisson and the members of the Maui County Council and the state legislature, in which we got very specific about restrictions that need to be lifted and waived in order for the work of recovery and restoration and rebuilding to go forward. It was well received. We're very glad for that. So we sent another memo in July called 6 Ways to Speed Up the Home Building of Lahaina. You can have a copy of this. It's available free on our website. It detailed policy reforms that can help ease the rebuilding process. And again, we're very glad for its reception. Then this month, we published a policy brief that looks at the water fixture unit policy. And that's become a very important issue and highlights how no small detail is too small for consideration and everything needs to be looked at. In fact, one of the things we've discovered is that it would take an army of people to comb through line by line every code, every regulation, every government restriction and rule relating to, in some fashion, the restoration of Lahaina. But that's why I'm glad for the energetic team at the Grassroot Institute. And there are 2 members today I want to ask to join me here at the stage. One will be our primary presenter, and that's Jonathan Helton. He's a summa cum laude graduate of the Fred Hardeman University. He studied law and politics. He's been published not only by Grassroot Institute, but the Honolulu Star Advertiser, Maui News, Travel Pulse, Real Clear Politics, the Mises Institute, and numerous other publications. He's become a recognized expert in terms of the regulations and government dimensions of Maui and Lahaina. And I think you're going to enjoy meeting him, although many of you know him and have worked with him quite a bit already. The other presenter today will be Joe Kent. You know him as the Executive Vice President of Grassroot Institute. He has led our Maui-focused research. In fact, it was over a decade ago that I actually met him when I came to Maui in my capacity as a Grassroot Institute team member. I found him as a very engaged community member who was a teacher at King Kamehameha III High School in Lahaina. Elementary school, yes, that's right, elementary school. And There, I could sense his heart for serving the public good, and so he's joined us since then. Sad to say, King Kamehameha III was burnt to the ground in the recent wildfires, so Joe has both a professional and a personal dimension to share with you today. Without further ado, please welcome our colleague at the Grassroot Institute, Jonathan Helton. Jonathan.
So, I need to tell you a little bit about myself before we begin this presentation. There are two main things that you need to know. Number one is that I used to do debate in high school, and I'm now a debate coach. And if any of you have ever been around high school debate, you might know that debaters tend to talk really quickly, and then they also use words that they don't define, and so you don't understand. And so what I tell my students is that the two most important things about debate are you have to define your terms, and you have to ask lots of questions. So I would give that to you as well. If there's something that I say that doesn't make any sense, raise your hand and say, hey, can you slow down? Go back. Or if you have a question, you can stand up and ask. Now, we're going to do Q&A at the end, so that might be a better time for the question, but I wanted to share that with you. And the second thing I wanted to share is about my capacity as a researcher at the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. At the Grassroot Institute, we are a think tank. We comment on state and local policy. I think that there's something that all of us probably wish that we knew more about, and that's disaster recovery. Because Hawaii had not had a disaster of the scale of the wildfires that affected Lahaina since Hurricane Iniki in the 1990s, and which is before I was around. So I am not someone who has professional expertise as someone who is a manager of disaster recovery. And I think that that's something that probably we wish the state probably had more of leading up to what happened last year. But with that, I'll share with you what I am. And I'm a researcher. I work on land and tax policy, especially in my job. So I try to identify things that get in the way, in this case, of rebuilding Lahaina. So with that, let me tell you what we're going to talk about today. Because, again, if you've been around speech or debate, you know that one of the rules is you tell people what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them that, and then you tell them what you told them. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to talk about what we believe that Maui could learn from what Maui County did after Hurricane Iniki. We're going to look at what worked in their response to Iniki and maybe some things that Maui County could improve on. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to go through an exercise of looking at a property on Front Street and trying to identify the different approvals that property might need in order to be rebuilt. Third, I'm going to talk about two different policies that are outlined in the reports that would assist with Maui's housing crisis as a general rule. And then the last thing we're going to do is that Joe and I are going to take questions from you all and from Dr. Akina and hopefully listen to the concerns you have that we might have missed. Because I'll tell you up front, in my research and looking at Lahaina and Hawaii's housing crisis in generally, what I've noticed is that we can change one law and that can do a lot of good. But ultimately, if we want more abundant and more affordable housing so that people can afford to stay here and raise their families, we're going to have to look at a whole lot of different rules. So with that, let's begin. Let's talk about our response as a policy research organization. Dr. Akina talked about the three things that we produced, so I'll just outline them briefly. What we've done is that we've tried to work with stakeholders to identify some of the barriers to rebuilding Lahaina. We've testified on bills at the state and county levels. I'll be getting into some of the details of those bills later on. And then finally, we've issued 3 memos on Maui housing. Dr. Akina mentioned those, and I'll put them up here. First, back in January, we sent a letter to the governor, the mayor, some other legislators, and that was in response to the temporary housing plan that was released. It was either in early January or late December of last year. So the temporary housing plan, we have seen some units go up. There have been challenges there. But in July, we issued this brief, which is a little bit more detailed, and it detailed 6 ways that we could remove some of these rules to make it easier to rebuild homes in Lahaina and on Maui in general. And then finally, as Dr. Akina mentioned, we issued a brief about the water fixture unit policy and how that kind of makes it harder to expand and renovate homes. I was the lead author on both the Lahaina brief and the fixture unit brief. So now let's look at what Kauai did after Hurricane Iniki. We published an article, and we've been looking at this for probably the past year. What can we learn about what Kauai did? So I think there's 4 things especially. The first thing relates to building permit fees. This is something that's very, very simple in my view. Kauai waived the building permit fees after Hurricane Iniki. And the scale of destruction there, I mean, it was pretty significant. Iniki, there were about 1,400 homes that were destroyed. 5,000 other homes were damaged. And so waiving the building permit fees, that was a simple start. On Maui, that has not happened yet. There has been a bill that is passed that I'll talk about in just a minute, and it allowed the option of fees to be deferred till the house has been completed, but it didn't waive them. And that can add several $1,000s to any home that's been destroyed and to the rebuilding cost. And then finally, talking about temporary structures, we have seen several projects that have been proposed to be built either by the state or by nonprofit partners that would house people who've been displaced by the fires. And they've had to pay some pretty significant fees. So let me just give you a couple of statistics there. The Ohana Hope Village, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, they had to pay over $35,000 in fees. The Kapalua Golf Course project, which I believe was recently completed, they had to pay over $15,000. The state has a project that's in Lahaina, and the state has a special exception in a Maui County code where they don't have to pay building permit fees. But to give you an example of just how much the state would have had to pay, they would have had to pay $1.1 million in fees if they didn't have that statutory exemption. So one of our suggestions is, hey, why don't we exempt anyone who's trying to build temporary housing or anyone who's trying to rebuild their home or business, exempt the building permit fees? Now that's really simple. Let's talk about the second thing. This is a little bit more substantive. Emergency permits. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you know, there has been an emergency permit process set up for homes and hopefully eventually businesses that would rebuild in the burn zone. So let's talk about what Kauai did. They set up a very similar process. They partnered with FEMA, and FEMA funded it, which was super helpful. But let me share some statistics on just how successful this was. So in the first 11 months after Iniki struck, this Office of Emergency Permitting in Kauai, they were able to issue about 3,400 residential building permits and over 100 non-residential building permits, which let me share by contrast what the permit expediter Four Leaf has been able to do so far. Since Four Leaf opened operation, which I believe was in April of this year, they've been able to process 83 permits. Now that doesn't sound like very much, but let's be fair. Rebuilding after a fire is much different than rebuilding after a hurricane. The debris removal that you need to do for fire cleanup is much more significant. And that's not totally done. I believe it's either was just finished or is almost done for residential, and they're hoping that commercial will be done by January. So that's part of the factor. The other part that I'd like to share is what Four Leaf has been able to do. So what Four Leaf has been able to do is just look at building permits. So if someone built their house within, say, the last 5 years, they can go to Four Leaf, this permit expediter, and they can get through the process really, really quickly. Four Leaf issued one residential rebuilding permit within 5 days. So it's pretty quick, right? Any of you who've worked with building permits here know that the average is going to be 3 or 4 months at least. So 5 days is good. Some of the permits have taken over 100 days, and of course, that doesn't sound very fast. They're an expediter after all. But the thing is, Four Leaf is only working on building permits. They are not working on your other land use approvals. So if you're in the special management area, which I'll talk about in a minute, so I'll give you the definition, or if you need any sort of other approval that's outside of the normal building permit process under Public Works, that's not really under Four Leaf's control. So that's why some of the permits have taken a lot longer than you would have hoped. But overall, we really like what Maui County has done for emergency permits. We hope that continues. The third thing that Kauai did after Iniki was to reduce property taxes. This is something that Maui County has already done. So Kauai cut tax rates for commercial and industrial properties about a year and a half after Iniki struck. This is a 1-year reduction. They cut the tax rates basically by half, which was pretty significant. And what Maui has done is something that's a little bit different, but we think it's very helpful. So at the end of last year, Maui passed Bill 95, and Bill 95 addressed properties that were in the burn zone. So if your property was in the yellow, green, or red burn zones, its property taxes were waived for the fiscal year that ended in July and this fiscal year. So no one in that area will be paying property taxes until August of 2025. So that's pretty good. Now, it's an open question as to whether or not people will really be able to rebuild by August 2025. So I do think we may need to consider having that waiver extended until people can really adequately have the chance to rebuild. But this is something that we thought was good for both Kauai and Maui. And then here's a chart. Don't we love charts? And if anyone who wants this chart, I can send it to them. This is just the amount that taxes were reduced by tax class in Maui. Finally, nonconformities, which is a big word that has to deal with zoning. So to explain it, let me give you an example. Let's say you own a piece of land zoned for an apartment building. And let's say it's the 1980s, which is also before I was born. So in the 1980s, you build a 20,000 square foot apartment building on this piece of land. But then what happens if the county changes the zoning rules? Let's say that after you build this 20,000 square foot apartment building, the county changes the rules and says that now for your size piece of land, you can only build 10,000 square feet of apartment building. That would make yours building something that is known as non-conforming. And so one of the things that Kauai did was they said, hey, we've got a lot of old buildings that probably don't meet the current zoning code. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass a bill that it grandfathers in those nonconformities. So if you had one of those apartment buildings that was built before the zoning code changed, you would be allowed to rebuild it to its previous level of density. So I know that's kind of confusing, but basically you'd be allowed to rebuild what you had. So for Lahaina, this is really, really important. A lot of the buildings there were very, very old, and a lot of them weren't legal to rebuild again today. And so, as I said, Kauai passed the grandfather ordinance. We're really hopeful that Bill 105 has a shot. That's been approved by the planning commissions. I think that was back in January. And it's been introduced to council. I think it's had one hearing so far. But what this bill would do is it would create a 5-year window in which a property could be rebuilt, and it could be rebuilt at the previous level of density. So it would do basically the same thing that Kauai did. So we're hopeful for this bill. We'll talk about how it's important a little bit later. But those are the 4 things we learned from Iniki. We learned that you really ought to be waiving some of these fees that get in the way, that an emergency permitting office is a good idea. Property taxes can be reduced, and nonconformities. So part 1 is done. Let's move to part 2. Let's rebuild a Front Street business. I have picked 700 Front Street, which is the former home of Hawaii Gelato, just as an example. And I'm going to give you a couple of disclaimers first. The first disclaimer is that in this exercise, we are going to assume that this building has adequate access to sewer and water. That's a bad assumption. Why is that a bad assumption? Because typically, it can be really hard for any sort of new building to have access to water or wastewater. But for the purposes of this example, we're going to assume that. So now, what kind of permits would you need to rebuild this specific building? Well, anyone want to guess how many there are? SMA, we'll talk about that in a minute. Yep, there are a lot. So let's look at the ones that I have just as an example. So SMA, that's first. All right, the special management area is shown on this map. So that's quite a significant amount of Lahaina that's covered in the SMA. And basically what the SMA law is Hawaii believes that sea level rise could affect these areas and the areas nearby the coast. And so what the purpose of the law is to place additional restrictions on what can be built along the coast, so that you don't have someone building, a 40-foot tower right on the beach and then it tips over, more or less, right? So you're going to need your SMA permit. Now, there are a couple of different SMA permits you could get, but for the purposes of our exercise, any building that is valued over $500,000 is going to need an SMA use permit. And that's basically the most intensive level of review that an SMA permit would have. So where would you need to get this use permit? Well, you'd have to get all of your materials together and you'd have to file an application with the Maui Planning Department. The Planning Department would send that application to the Planning Commission and they would need to vote to approve it. They would, or they could deny it, or they could say, hey, can you change these things about the project and then we'll approve it. Normally that takes a while. Maybe you could get one in 4 months, maybe. No, probably not even normally. Oh my, okay, 8 months. So I'm being generous. So I think I've heard the statistic that maybe the Maui County Planning Commission has issued 40 SMA majors over the past decade. So for a year. I mean, how many structures are we talking about rebuilding? We're talking about hundreds, and we can't wait 1,000 years, right, to rebuild Lahaina. I mean, at that point, it really might all be underwater, for all I know. But the point is, if we're okay, SMA, that needs to be addressed. So let's look at the next thing, because that's just one, right? You're going to have to deal with the historic district zoning for this particular parcel. Here's a map. These are the Historical District 1 and Historical District 2 zones in Lahaina. And so what would you need to do if you wanted to rebuild a home in a historical district? Well, you would need to go before the Cultural Resources Commission, a different commission of Maui County. And so you need to get all of your materials together. You need to say, here's what I want to build. Here's what it would look like, because they kind of want you to build it in the historical style of the time. And then you need to get their approval to build it. Well, if any of you have been reading the news, you know that a lot of Maui's boards and commissions don't have enough people on them. And that's for a lot of different reasons. Whatever the reason is, the Cultural Resources Commission just canceled a lot of its meetings last year because they didn't have quorum. And so now all of your buildings that have been damaged or destroyed in these blue areas, they're going to need to go there and they're going to need to get approval as well. So that's your second one. But wait, there's more. You're going to need to deal with the National Historic Landmark District. This is a federally imposed district on the area around Lahaina. Here's a map. So the National Historic Landmark District is the black lined area. The green and the yellow are the county historic districts. So if you happen to be in both of these, or even just in the National Historic Landmark District, what do you need to do to build something? Well, there's some exceptions, but generally you're going to need at least an environmental assessment to be done. So you're going to have to go out, find a consulting firm, pay them to do the environmental assessment, and then you have to submit that to either the Planning Commission or the Cultural Resources Commission. And you're also going to have to get Cultural Resources Commission approval to build there. So that's the third thing. And keep in mind, it's going to take time to draft an environmental assessment. And that's going to cost a lot of money. And you have to do it right, because if you don't do it right, someone might protest that you've done something wrong and that you've overlooked a part of it that is really important. So, all right, that's the third thing. What's the fourth thing? You might need a zoning variance. So for this particular structure, if any of you are familiar with it, and I had to look on Google Maps just to be able to see what it looked like before the fire. There's no parking, And anyone who's built a business or home before knows that the county has rules that you have to provide a certain number of parking spaces. And so if you want to be able to rebuild this, well, now half of that plot might be a parking lot. So now that's half, that's half is less. That's not the grammatically correct way to say that. You have half of the building that you did. That's the point. Now, I will say I put the asterisk there because there is in county code a rule, and this is a good rule, that if you are rebuilding in a historic district, that you can they can kind of give you an exemption so that you might not need a variance. This relates to nonconformities, right? So if you had a nonconforming structure in a historic zone and that was destroyed, then you could then you could rebuild it with the nonconformity only if you did that within 2 years. So if things are not able to be addressed in terms of this particular issue within 2 years, now half of Lahaina is going to be a parking lot, realistically. So okay, well that's a problem. Is there more? Yes, there is. Street improvements. There's a county rule that says if you're building something like a business or a residential unit that has more than 3 dwellings on the lot, and there's a couple of exceptions, but the general rule is you're going to have to pay to improve sidewalks, you're going to have to pay to maybe underground the utilities or widen the road, put in gutters, etc. And that costs a lot of money, right? So now once you've gotten you've gotten your permits, you've gotten your plans together, now they're going to require you to rebuild the roadway around this business. And once we get through all that, now you can get your building permit. And that's not cheap either, right? If you're building a large business, that's going to cost a lot of money just for the building permit. So what do we get? In total, at the very least, $10,000 in fees to the county. That does not include any number that you would pay to have someone come in and be a consultant to work on your environmental assessment, any of that. That's just county fees right there. But that's not the real issue, right? The real issue is the time. Because you're going to have to go through all 6 of these different levels of approval for every single property. I mean, unless something changes, that's impossible, right? And we'll talk a little bit later about, why it's really important that the county, I'm sure a lot of you already think that, yeah, it's important for the county to try to clear some of these hurdles where it can. But it really is, because if the mom and pop businesses that owned a lot of these lots, if they can't rebuild, that land is zoned commercial, it's zoned apartment. Somebody with deep pockets who has no connection to the community is going to come in and rebuild. Someone's going to rebuild something in these areas, right? So for anyone who's with the county, with the state, it doesn't matter, whoever you are, the question is, who do we want to rebuild? We can make it really hard, and then people who have no ties to Lahaina, they'll be the ones to rebuild. But if we want to try to restore some of the feel of Lahaina, you're probably going to need to clear some of these barriers. So let me tell you, this list of 6 is incomplete. Let me read just a couple more that I didn't read because they don't apply to the specific building. So if your building is a little bit closer to the shoreline, you're going to need a shoreline assessment. And you might need a shoreline variance. That's going to cost time and take money. The other way around, that's going to take money. Anyway, you know what I mean. You also could need a flood zone permit, depending on where it's located. You might also have to deal with the State Commission on Water Resources Management, the Urban Design Review Board, etc. You can add a lot more approvals depending on where the property is located. So what's our suggestion? Well, our suggestion is, I think it's simple, at least it sounds simple, and it's that the state and the county need to get together and they need to waive a lot of these laws. Make it simple for people to rebuild. All right, going to number 3. And then after number 3, I will sit down and you no longer have to listen to me talk. All right, you can ask us questions. That'll be fun. All right, the number 3 is what can Maui County do to help the housing crisis as a whole. So the first thing it can do, and we think this would be really helpful, is legalize more accessory dwelling units. So those are those little backyard cottages that people talk about a lot these days. So at the state level, we worked really hard with different members of the House of Representatives and the Senate and a lot of other people interested in housing, and we were able to get a bill through, and Governor Green signed it, that basically told the counties, you need to allow more accessory dwellings in your county. And so we're hopeful that this can lead to more housing. At the Maui County Council, the rule is more or less you can do one accessory dwelling per lot. If your lot is above 7,500 square feet, you can do two, unless you live on the islands of Lanai or Molokai. As I said, this is the general rule. Then there are a couple of bills at the Maui County Council right now that would seek to legalize more ADUs per lot. So it's Bill 103 and Resolution 24-143. Those are Bill 103 has been approved by the Planning Commission. The resolution has not yet been sent to the Planning Commission. So both of these bills are in the very early stages, but we are hopeful that they'll get passed soon because they have to comply with state law. So that's number one. Number two is update the fixture unit rules. This is another one that needs a definition. So what's a fixture unit? Okay, so as best as I can describe it, your sink is a fixture unit. Anything that uses water is a fixture, right? And so what the Maui County Department of Water has done is it has said, all right, if you're going to put in an extra sink, that's going to cost you a fixture unit, which is more or less a measurement of how much water that water fixture would use at a given time. So what's the problem with these fixture unit rules? Well, that's a good question. We wrote a report about it. I hope you'll read it. But the main problem is that Maui County hasn't updated these since 1995. And things have changed since 1995, right? Water appliances have gotten a lot more efficient. So you might not really need to use as many fixture units now than you would have in 1995. So how is this a problem for housing? Well, it's mostly a problem for housing because if you need more fixture units on your water meter, you have to pay the county more in fees, or you have to buy a bigger water meter. So anyone who's looking to add one of those accessory dwelling units in their backyard, or maybe you're wanting to do a renovation on your house, you might run up against this fixture unit limit, and either the county will say, hey, yeah, we can allow you to have more sinks and more toilets, but you're going to have to pay $4,000. Or they might say, your water meter is at its limit. You're going to have to buy a new water meter, which would cost you maybe $15,000. So what we identified in this report is what Dr. Akina talked about and what I talked about at the beginning. We can identify one big rule change that we think will help. Let's legalize more accessory dwelling units. But if you don't identify the 10 other little rules that also affect how houses can be built and where, you might not really have any housing getting built. So that's what we wanted to do with this report. Finally, let's talk about some legislation that's at the county that we're really hopeful about. There's 3 bills that have passed that we really like. We've already talked about the property tax waiver. We've already talked about the emergency permitting that they passed. And then the one thing I did want to let you guys know about is that the emergency permitting bill that passed a couple of months ago at the council, and it's now law, it basically said, hey, if you are a nonprofit and you got a building permit to put up temporary structures, what we're going to do is we're going to allow those temporary structures to be in place for at least for possibly 5 years. Now, the reason that's important is because, well, we're not rebuilding things very quickly. And so realistically, we're going to need to keep those temporary structures around for more than 6 months, which had been the previous rule. So the 4 or 5 years will, we think definitely be very helpful for the county's housing situation. And finally, there are a couple of good bills in process. And I see some of you are writing this down. We would be happy to send you this slideshow if you would like. We talked about legalizing more ADUs, little cottages per lot. That Bill 104 would legalize more small kitchens. Bill 105 would address those nonconformities we talked about earlier. that deal with the zoning variances. And then there is a bill, Bill 110, that would give a waiver to the street improvement fees that we discussed. And then finally, Bill 98 would change how modular and manufactured homes are permitted. So, I've talked about how there's all these rules in the way, and, frankly, where Aniki was, or excuse me, where Kauai was 1 year after Aniki was a better place than where Maui is 1 year after the fires, in terms of getting things rebuilt and having more of a plan. But these bills indicate, to me at least, that there's a reason to have hope. And so I'm hoping that through the conversations like these, that hope becomes reality. So with that, I think that Joe and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was an excellent presentation. As you head over to the table there and Joe Kent joins you, think this through a bit, and I'll let you answer as soon as you get to another microphone. What's at stake, Jonathan, right now? Why is it so very important for us to get the regulatory conditions right?
Check, check. Okay, there we go. So I might need the clicker back. I have a slide I want to show. So what's at stake? Well, I talked about some of the things that are at stake in terms of, are we going to get the community feeling of Lahaina back, or are people just going to leave? But I want to talk about what happened to Kauai after Hurricane Aniki. So all of this information that I'm about to share is from a 2009 study that was done by the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization, so UHERO. They did some pretty interesting math, and now it's a chart, and I don't like charts sometimes. They're confusing. Let me explain it to you because it doesn't make any sense if you look at it. So the red line is Kauai County. The blue line is Maui County. After Iniki hit, which is right here, Kauai County's population dropped. And then, as you can tell, it should have been along the same trend line, but it dropped and it never came back. UHERO estimates that Kauai lost 10% of its population permanently. And keep in mind, this study was done in 2009. That was 17 years after Iniki. And the last date here is 2005. So 15 years after, 13 years after, the population never recovered. There's one more chart. This is jobs. It's the same thing. Kauai County is in red, Maui County is in blue. After Iniki hit, Kauai lost a lot of jobs. Trend line never came back. UHERO estimates that was the equivalent of about 3,000 jobs going away and never returning. The economy lost $200 million. Now, in human terms, we can talk about GDP and jobs, but in human terms, that means that 10% of Kauai's population left and didn't come back. The island didn't bounce back, even 15, 17 years later. So what's at stake is, Maui County has a population of, I think, about 200,000 people. So, what happens if 20,000 people leave? We're not sure how many people have left already because the U.S. Census doesn't report data in real time. But what's at stake is that people leave. If you're a business owner, maybe you leave. So that means that the people who stay, there's less job opportunities. Probably means Maui gets more unaffordable, if that's even possible. We're already seeing that now with what rents have done after the wildfire. So what's at stake is Maui loses its culture because people can't afford to be here. There's no homes, so they leave. So that's what's at stake. And as I said, I am hopeful that that's not what happens.
Thanks, Jonathan. And as all you know, What Jonathan mentioned is compounded by the fact that we have a trend statewide of an exodus from our state for economic reasons. Joe Kent is monitoring very closely some rebuilding efforts here on the ground in Maui and particularly in Lahaina. Joe, are there some general challenges that you're seeing that you'd add to what Jonathan has presented?
Yeah, so our whole team has talked a lot with people who are trying to build housing on Maui, and especially after the rebuilding. And we're kind of like therapists for people who are having a lot of troubles getting through the system. And I've had people cry, telling me their story. I've had exasperated conversations. There's a huge culture of fear about this, by the way. Nobody wants to be named in their struggles, lest the powers that be come down on them like a hammer. And so, hello. And a lot of emotion too, which I think now we're at the time where it may all evaporate. We're at kind of the make or break time for a lot of these projects. After the tragic fires on August 8th, I've heard stories of people who were sitting up in bed, stayed up all night trying to make the decision about whether to move forward and invest millions of dollars into a project that may never see the light of day. And they, moved forward because they felt the need there. And now, after a year, they're reassessing this. They can't get the permits that they need. And the money isn't coming in to keep it going forever. And so there, a lot of projects I think we're going to see are going to give up over the next few months, sadly. At the same time, you see a lot of the government, the state-run projects and so on that do seem to be moving forward. And some of the private projects are being sold to the state. So we'll see what happens, but it's a lot of tragedy.
Yes, indeed. Jonathan, you mentioned in your presentation that after 1991, government officials on Kauai came up with a workaround process to help people get their permits. Could you say a little bit more about that, and do you think that could be applicable and used here on the island of Maui?
Yes. So I did talk about that a little bit, but to share just a couple of statistics, in our research on what happened on Kauai, the people were estimating that rebuild would take 4 years, which that sounds like a long time, but that wasn't what happened. In terms of getting the houses rebuilt, they said it took about 2.5 years actually. So things like the Office of Emergency Permitting that Kauai established did help, and they helped get things permitted faster. Now, of course, Kauai had a problem with people building things without permits, but hey, at least they were building things, right? So I think that what the infrastructure that Maui has set up with Four Leaf is something that could probably be expanded over the next several years to make sure that once people get through all the other approvals, once they get to the building permit, they can get it in 5 days, maybe.
Thank you. Joe, I know you've been busy, you and your team, monitoring government hearings and poring over testimony, as well as statements made by our government officials. What are some of the challenges you're discovering in that research?
Well, I think one of the big challenges has to do with SMA. Whenever you see that brought up at the county council, I think council members often speak in hushed tones or in some sort of code, but basically saying that it's too political to reform a lot of these processes. That's what they're really saying. The other one is the Commission on Water Resources Management. That's another big elephant in the room. Jonathan brought it up a little bit. If you want to talk about that more, please do. But basically, that's what I'm seeing is the big problem with a lot of these projects moving forward. And then there's the State Historic Preservation Division as well. Anyone who wants to dig or build infrastructure, water lines, they have to go through that. And So basically, government officials are speaking in hushed tones and in code about whether or not these things can be waived. I mean, look at the waivers. The governor waived a lot of rules after the fires, but not the local rules. Then you've got the mayor who could waive a lot of these rules through an emergency proclamation if he wanted to. But I don't know, maybe he's delegating that decision to the county heads and bureaucrats who also could waive their rules as well. There's a lot, for every single regulation, it can be opened and closed, but nobody actually wants to take the heat for opening and closing those regulations. So.
Thank you. Before I ask Jonathan the next question, I want to invite any of you to come up to this microphone over here and ask your question if you have a question or maybe even a comment that you want to add to what has been shared today. So just feel free to walk up to this microphone over here. Jonathan, there's a private sector solution that has been applied to some extent. 4-Leaf, I believe is the name of it. It helps people to get through the permit process and get the documents that they need. Has it had any tangible results?
Yes. So as I said, 83 permits have been issued so far. The rules around 4-Leaf are that you're supposed to be able to get your permit within 15 days. But as I said, that depends on you getting all of your other approvals in line first. So that's why we're seeing it have a relatively limited effect now. But if I can just piggyback off of something that Joe said, I am going to make an assumption about you all that might not be a correct assumption. My assumption is that a lot of you want to see Lahaina rebuilt, and I know there are people who have different viewpoints that maybe don't want to see as much of it get rebuilt or see it get rebuilt in a different way, and to talk about maybe building up parks or monuments there. If that's a park or monument would be absolutely great. But as I said earlier, if the people who owned businesses there are not the ones who rebuild, someone else is going to. And secondly, I just wanted to say, if we're looking at this with an us versus them, maybe it's, I have a lot and I want to rebuild versus the people who want to see Lahaina become something other than what it was. I think that everyone's going to lose, because I think everyone's probably they're going to fight at the county council, you're going to fight at the planning commission. Unfortunately, we're seeing some of that, but I share some of the things that I do with everyone to say, like, if Lahaina is not rebuilt, if Maui doesn't build housing somewhere, what happened to Kauai? That's almost certainly going to happen here. And, and having our friends and family leave, that's something nobody wants. So that's my 2 cents, I reckon.
Well, I appreciate that, Jonathan. And as you hear in Jonathan's words and his voice, not only has he gained a keen overview intellectually of what's going on, his heart is very much in what has taken place, and he has deep feelings. Joe, you as well. You recently met with a group of business owners or former business owners from Front Street.
Yes, there's a group of business owners, Front Street, Lahaina, who are trying to get together and bring the message out. Don't forget about us. In all of this talk about rebuilding housing, there were a lot of businesses that need to be rebuilt, and that's why I'm so glad that Jonathan went through one of the examples as a business, because that's important too. I kind of feel awkward talking about it because I'll bet you there are people in the audience who have stories about this, and I would much rather hear from them too. So anyways, yeah.
Yes, indeed. If you have something to contribute, feel free to use our microphone. I'm going to start with Chuck over here. Thank you for your patience,
okay.
Chuck.
Is this working or what?
Thank you for being first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're welcome. We're not just the people in Lahaina aren't the only one that needs help. After the fire, all of our businesses in Maui have been down. After all this time, we're still 40% down on what we should be. And not only to reward us with that, at the beginning of this year, they raised our gross excise tax in Maui, and then they raised our property tax. So I went into the tax department, had a big argument. Why do you raise my property tax? Because property values are property are selling for more around you. Yeah, well, some guy from China bought the lot next to me for $650,000. So now my property tax goes up because some guy in China bought a lot next door and paid way too much. It's crazy why they punish us and we're all suffering. I don't think it's a question, sorry.
But, well, it's a profound statement. Thank you. Give Chuck a hand. Thank you very much for sharing that. Please come to the microphone. We would love to be able to let everyone hear you.
Go ahead, Susan.
Go ahead, Susan, one of our eminent journalists.
Former journalist, but semi-retired. I'm Susan Hallis. I've been a writer. I've written mostly land use and politics since 1976. So I've had an opportunity. I was here for Aniki. I was here for what you just described. What is of concern to me right now is there's an awful lot of rumors that I hear about moving the whole town back as managed retreat. The idea of what is going to happen to the buildings on the water side of Front Street, all the way from Puamana to the old chart house. Are those going to be allowed to rebuild, or is there going to be a new district proposed that's all like you folks in Ala Moana Park is, long, green, open space. But that would have a really massive effect on a lot of people's lives. But it also would make sense to a lot of other people in terms of what are the realities of climate change and the likelihood that if you rebuilt on the ocean, you couldn't get insurance, or your insurance would be so much you couldn't run your business because all your your revenue would go to paying your new insurance bill if you could get insurance. So, Joe, I am told things that are rumors. And the general rule of thumb for reporters is if you hear it from 3 unrelated sources and it sort of matches up, doesn't mean that it's true. It means that there's probably something to it. So I have heard this from at least three unrelated sources. Have you heard it, and do you have any comment on it?
I have not heard that, but I have heard about insurance as a major barrier in the rebuilding, of course. If you look at the Family Life Center project, the Ohana Hope Villages, insurance is a key issue there. With wildfire risk, even in Honolulu, by the way, we're seeing wildfire risk reassessed and repriced, and so yes, there. But I haven't heard of the Lahaina part yet.
Okay, so that is I want to reiterate, that is not a fact. That is a rumor, but I have heard it from multiple people. Most of them have been in some level of affluence. They either own property, or they're part of a hui, or they're a management person in a larger firm. And it keeps on, well, what about chemos on the water, or what about the old Bubba Gumps, or what about the buildings across the street, or what about Fleetwood's on Front? Are those? I happen to hold an active real estate broker's license, and I know some of those same people that you know on Front Street, and they're telling me that they not only aren't they getting answers, they're not even getting meetings. So, comment, Rick?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that group that's been trying to get a meeting with the county, the group that you mentioned earlier with the with Front Street, which is the same question that I have been asking all along, that I asked Mr. With the economic recovery, is that how much economy did Front Street bring into the county? Because as I'm telling people from the during the fire right now, when people come to Maui, if they don't go to Front Street, it feels like their visit to Maui is incomplete. Front Street is the center of Maui. And so and of course, nobody's talking about it, which is really sad, because the people that need to be heard is that, look, either you tell us to rebuild or we don't. And if you don't rebuild, what is the next plan? What are we going to do? So, Musa Hassan has been very active trying to get that audience with the mayor, trying to figure out what can we do here. Because if I could just stand up.
Why don't you take
Because here I don't want to speak here to monopolize this meeting, because to me, Joe and I lost our home. We are with the West Maui Taxpayer Association. The reason why Front Street is so big with me also is the fact that we talk a lot about the unemployed. There's so many Filipinos that are underemployed, and Front Street is where they were working. We keep talking about the unemployed. There's so much underemployed in Lahaina that a lot of these people left the island, to the point that a lot of the businesses now do not have employees. Now, if you look at the population of Lahaina, what happened, it's easy. Before the fire, Kamehameha Third School had 600 students. Right now, they only have 300 students. Right there tells you what's happening. Maybe they move here on the other side of the island. Maybe they move out of the, maybe they move to Wow somewhere else, but they have left Lahaina. And in the great wisdom of the FEMA people, or whoever was these people that they decided to do something about housing, they decided to put people in Haiku, all these places, knowingly that Lahaina Luna is what keeps the people in Lahaina to remain in Lahaina. You do not pull us off Lahaina and say, okay, we have a house for you in Wailuku. No. We have to be in Lahaina Luna. You're not going to send my child who's been in Lahaina Luna for 3 years and now you're going to want him to graduate in Baldwin High School? See, the whole concept, the whole thing is so frustrating. Like I said, we live in Lahaina. Joe and I have been working furiously at our best since 2019 to have a fire station in Lahaina, and we're able to do that. I don't know if you know the situation that's going on in Lahaina right now, and I appreciate all these buildings that we're talking about. But the one issue to me right now, as we're getting all these permits, are we addressing the issue of safety? See, people, this is what pisses me off the most, is that people, I understand that we want to rebuild our house. People died on Mill Camp, right behind the smokestack, because they could not get out of those roads. Now, if you were to go up on Kilauea Mauka 3 right now, where we're trying to rebuild our home, if you were to go there at night, when all the workers come home from where they're working because we do not have a good public transportation, so everybody's back, you can't get out of those roads. So for us to rush to build homes right now because people are screaming, we need housing, no, we have a clean canvas. We should really focus on what are we going to do with all the homes on Kilauea Mauka 1, Kilauea Mauka 2, Kilauea Mauka 3. Instead, oh yeah, we need the housing, we got to build. No, we can't build without thinking about safety. Safety should be first. I'm sorry, I'm being ran out here, but I just kind of that's why I wanted to come here and listen, because I'm hearing all of this thing that we need to rebuild. Well, can we focus on the safety first before we start rebuilding?
Rick,
Because 24 people died in one area.
Yes. Rick,
So
thank
anyway-
you very much.
So anyway, I'm
No,
sorry.
your heart is good, and I appreciate your sharing that. Absolutely. And I want to assure you that in terms of our position at the Grassroot Institute, we're looking only at a slice of the problem, which is how do we get the inventory back for people to be able to have homes. But what you're saying can't be overruled. We have to put the health and safety of human beings first always. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Feel free to come to the microphone, please. Thank you. Kindly introduce yourself and ask your question or share what you'd like to share.
Hi, my name is Jeremiah. I just have a quick question. Do you have any insight at all on the development or the process of redeveloping the harbor as it pertains to the rebuilding of Lahaina? Because it's a huge part of the economy. Yeah, definitely to what Rick was saying.
Thank you. Joe.
No, I'm sorry to say we haven't researched that, but if there's anyone here that could give us insight right now. Call Angus McKelvey, they said. Okay.
Good to look into. Yes, did you want to respond to that question or a different one? Please come to the microphone and introduce yourself. Thank you.
My name's Sarah, and
Hi,
thank
Sarah.
you for being here today. I just wanted to touch upon what you said about the businesses, the small business owners being such an intricate part of the fabric of Lahaina, not wanting to lose that. And I wondered if you guys had any stats on the ownership, because I do believe that most of those small business owners were renting as well. So what does that look like in the big picture? Yes, they make up the heart of Lahaina, but as stakeholders, how powerful are they in reality? Because isn't it how much of Front Street was owned by how many people. I've heard anywhere from 80 to 87% of it might have been under ownership of one group, and so I'm just curious. They really would be the drivers in this, and who are those owners, and are they part of this conversation? Do they recognize what we're saying, what we all know? Who makes up Lahaina? I was looking for some of that information.
Yeah, I can.
That's a good question. Jonathan, do you
I
want
can comment to part of that. So, UHERO has said that there were 834 businesses in Lahaina. I have looked at the U.S. Census Bureau website to see how many jobs those businesses provided, or how much GE tax or TAT tax they produced. I don't know business ownership off the top of my head. I'll look and I'll get back with you. But I did want to share. When we're talking about the businesses there, that's probably the most important part. But in any of these conversations, it's important to note that, as you said, if people are visiting Maui and they don't get to visit Front Street, what are they missing? Well, in terms of for the county, the county is in a position where in terms of money, the county is about to have to pay a very significant settlement. Where's the money going to come from? We can talk about that. But in terms of what Lahaina added to the county's tax base, that can't be ignored when we're having these conversations either. And that's a question I'm still trying to find the answer to in terms of how much did it add. But I just wanted to throw that out there to you guys as well as something to be thinking about and talking about with others as you have these conversations.
Thank you. Sir, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Lee Potts. I've lived in Lahaina with my wife since 2006. And we lived in condos, so that's going to take a while to build back. But just the complexity of building a single-family home and the amount of permitting that needs to go through, with all respect to Rick's comments, is there any precedent for simplifying? If I had a house in Lahaina, in Shark Pit, that's been there for decades, why on earth do I need to go through SMA and all the legal? I mean, you've got to have an architect, you've got to find a contractor, and I don't know where contractors are going to find skilled labor when all of this really gets rolling. But that's the difference. It would seem like there must be precedent somewhere to simplify the permitting process and eliminate the expense. I mean, beyond what was presented here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joe, do you want to take a response?
Okay, well, I was thinking in my head about, the county has allowed 4-leaf to privately run the permitting process, and that supposedly is going to help things. It supposedly has helped things, actually. On the mainland, permitting offices take 2 days, 3 days to get through. Many of them are run by private companies. And I wonder if this could be a model in Hawaii, but at the same time with safety and acknowledging the need for that as well. But go ahead.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan Churchill. I am land use chair on Front Street Recovery, Musa's Hui, and so I've been working since December on a lot of the things you brought up today. Jonathan, great presentation, point on all the layers. I think for our Hui, which represents a group of landowners from 500 to 900 Front Street, kind of that core area, our goal has been looking for exemptions, fast tracking the permit process and carve outs. After waiting patiently about a year, which we did respectfully to let people grieve, let the residential get on track, we started pushing more and more. And what we waited for was a direction from the planning department and the mayor. There is no exemptions, process your permits as normal. And so what Jonathan just went through, we went through with the mayor's office a couple weeks ago. And we've met with everyone, planning director's office of recovery, state office of planning. We've gone through everyone about the rebuilding process. And as it's come, a little over 13 months now, we've gone back to the solution is exemptions and modifications to existing law. So we drafted Bill 110. We helped draft Bill 105. We have, I think, 3 bills that are going to go to the legislature regarding exemption and fast track. So basically, it's to not circumvent the county, but make it so the county says, well, you got to follow the SMA rules, which is a state law, coastal zone management law, and basically say, well, the state exempts it, the county, you don't have to follow it. And so you'll see a bunch of legislation coming in that impacts both commercial and the residential side to help come up with this more expedited process. Because the challenge is, despite how well-intended the county is, it is, as Jonathan said, impossible for them to process this many permits. There's 162 commercial buildings, another 100 or so single-family homes that are going to need a major SMA that cannot get through there. So I think I just wanted to add that little commentary to the great presentation you guys did. Another note is, go to UHERO website. They just updated last Friday, and you'll be shocked looking at the Maui statistics compared to the statewide that Carl Bonham just released on Friday. And basically, I was at a conference in Honolulu, land use conference in Honolulu on Thursday, and Carl Bonham presented and said we've gone from a wildfire type crisis to a financial crisis in West Maui, and the states needs to get on it and help solve it.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate
Thank you.
that. Now, we've got 3 more individuals before we close today, and if you'd help me out to quickly state.
I'll try to go quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Jim Kuhn. Our family runs Maui's oldest charter boat company.
Yes.
We had 166 employees at the day of the fire. A third of them lived in Lahaina. We had significant losses. We're very grateful we didn't lose everything. We are going to survive, but now we are, many of our workforce left because they lost their homes. These are not easy times in the tourist industry right now, and yet our harbor just languishes. The harbor is the heart of Lahaina town, and Deal and R already had the slips and everything. They already had all the material to rebuild half the harbor before the fire. It's sitting, they have it, it's paid for, it's ready. We could have had a harbor functioning within, the Corps did a great job in cleaning the harbor, but now the harbor is just on a back burner. It'll probably be at the current rate, who knows, maybe 5 years, maybe longer, I don't know. But without Lahaina Harbor, and I want to mention that it was a charter boat industry. We were the first responders. We were the ones out there that first night rescuing people out of the water. We were the ones transferring people up to Kaanapali, from Kaanapali back to Maui. We were the ones bringing the Maui Electric crew from Lanai over to Maui. Our government was absolutely absent for the first week. I mean, so be it. But I'm just saying that we're an important part of the community, and we need some Lahaina Harbor, Lahaina Front Street needs to be put back on the map. Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Teo Stiller. Great presentation. I moved here from Oahu about 6 years ago with my family, and we do business and financial planning and working with a lot of small business owners. Many of them were in Lahaina, and they lost their businesses. And my initial thought, aside from the shock, was the ripple effect. What's going to happen down the road? It's hard enough, even before the fires, for people to survive to live here, and they might have been on the fence about, do we stay, do we leave? And this might have just pushed them over the edge. So I don't know what the answer is. It's just something that has been on my mind a lot as we've committed to keeping people here. And I mean, we work with a lot of people from medical professionals to construction, and even them, they're on the fence about leaving. When you were bringing up the stats about Kauai and construction in particular, where did the construction workers come from? The companies come from? Because that's something that's going to happen here as well, I foresee. I don't know if you have any data on that, but I'd be curious. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Teo. Thank you.
Not off the top of my head, but now I have another question to go answer, so I'll get back with you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lorena Quintes. Many people know me as Lolo from Front Street. I had 2 businesses, Maui Surf Culture and Maui Ink Culture, right at 602 Front Street, which was a crosswalk through Cam 3 school where I could just, Tito was one of the crosswalks. I could bring my daughter over there. But I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say, when you're bringing up some stuff, I started to almost cry, like I'm about to cry now. Talk about milk camp and all the stats. And it's like, it's tough because where's the 87% of renters? We're in milk camp in my neighborhood. Where are they going? Where's the 13% of homeowners? You mentioned that they're going to be able to, are they going to be able to pass all these things? Where are they going to go? And then as a business owner, I was almost with the Matsumotos to be, secured a contract to buy that place, to continue fostering all our youth programs and cleaning up and doing everything we did. And then now, it sounds like to me that where is Lahaina going to be? Sounds like those deep pockets. Sounds like we're getting pushed out. Incentives for me, when I lived in a 4-bedroom place, is to go to a Minatoy list where there's a 1-bed or a 1-car parking place, rule regulated. I had animals. We had more cars. And then I hear the single-family homes are going up in price. They are. In August, they just skyrocketed up. So, yeah. And then we see commercials about Vegas, realtors, Hawaii, Vegas. So is that my incentive to move? But you know what? I lost all my material. I didn't lose my heart. And I just wanted to say, because, man, you guys just bring up some stuff that is really difficult to go through. But you guys sound like, and it feels like you have the heart of Maui. So thank you guys. I just wanted to thank you guys and thank Makua. And mahalo everybody for being here.
Thank you, Lolo. Thank you so much. What a very fitting and poignant comment to end on today. And all of your comments, all of your participation reminds me that this issue is far from over. We're at the beginning of something that will define the true resilience and recovery of the people of Maui and all Hawaii. And I want to thank you for being part of it. We don't in any way position ourselves as the experts. We have a narrow field that we operate in terms of policy work, and we want to do our part. But we realize that it is the parts of so many at so many levels, and all of you as stakeholders who live here, that will ultimately make the difference. And as we like to say at the Grassroot Institute, e hana kako, let us work together. Thank you for being here. If you'd like to stay in touch and want a copy of today's presentation, as well as, Jonathan, if I can task you and Joe with this, as well as a summary of responses that you promised in the answers, we'd like to send that to you. Simply request it on this white card that's at your table, and we'll send it to you. You can also sign up for our weekly publications, and we'll stay in touch with you. Thank you so very much. On behalf of the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, aloha.